On the far edge of Willow Creek, Montana, the roads turned to glass as Sarah Jennings guided her battered Subaru along the empty county stretch. Midnight pressed in from all sides. Her shift at the grocery had run late, and all she could think of was her son's face in the glow of their kitchen lamp, waiting up with a mug of cocoa. She squeezed the steering wheel, breath ghosting out in clouds, heat in the car barely working. Then, the engine coughed, sputtered, and died. The world outside seemed to freeze with her. She tried the ignition, nothing but clicks. Sarah cursed softly, fishing her phone out, but there was no signal. The only light was the weak beam of her flashlight and a sliver of moon, barely enough to catch the glint of frost on the fence posts and the empty fields. A sudden sound shattered the silence, a desperate, echoing neigh, ragged with fear and pain. Sarah stiffened. Somewhere beyond the fence, hidden in the blackness, something needed help. She considered walking toward town, but the sound clawed at her, tugging at every memory of loneliness and abandonment she'd ever known. Heart pounding, Sarah crossed the ditch, boots crunching in snow. The wind battered her, sharp as knives, as she trudged toward the old barn she'd passed for years, but never really noticed. Its paint was flaking, doors half-rotted. Another harsh whinny. Her flashlight caught a glint, two wide, terrified eyes inside the barn's side stable. She almost turned away. It wasn't her problem. She was freezing, exhausted. But as she peered through the slats, her resolve hardened. Inside stood a brown horse, ribs jutting, its coat dull and filthy, its hooves cracked and bloody. Around its neck, a rusty chain. The stall stank of rot and neglect. Sarah's breath caught. Her mind spun with questions. Who could do this? Why leave an animal in such misery in this forgotten place? Hands shaking, she tugged at the lock. It wouldn't budge. She looked around, found a length of rebar and jammed it into the hasp, working furiously until the lock snapped. Her fingers were numb by the time the door creaked open, and she barely managed to shrug off her coat to drape over the shivering horse. It flinched, wild-eyed, but then, slowly, leaned into her touch, warm breath feathering her cheek. She felt the first glimmer of trust, a fragile, wordless bond. Sarah whispered, "It's all right. You're not alone anymore." In that moment, the wind outside seemed to pause, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The old barn, the winter night, the broken-down car, all of it faded. There was only Sarah, the horse, and the beginning of something she didn't yet understand. The horse's muzzle pressed to her shoulder, as if to say thank you, and Sarah realized she was crying. Somewhere in the darkness, an answer waited. Who left this animal here, and why? But for now, Sarah just held the horse, wrapping it in every ounce of hope she could muster, knowing this night had changed both their lives forever. And as she led the horse out into the night, still shivering but alive, she felt, for the first time in years, the stirrings of courage and possibility in her chest. This horse, whoever he was, would never be alone again. Sarah's breath steamed as she trudged through the deep Montana snow, one arm around the horse's trembling neck, the other gripping her useless flashlight. The old barn faded behind them, swallowed by the howling wind and darkness. Step by step, she coaxed the shivering animal along the roadside toward the distant orange glow of Willow Creek's main street, hope mingling with terror. This was no ordinary rescue. She felt it in the air, in the way the night pressed down as if warning her to turn back. By the time Sarah reached the Willow Creek Veterinary Clinic, her fingers were raw, cheeks burned red, and the horse staggered with exhaustion. The bell above the clinic's door rang out sharply as she stumbled inside, snow flurrying behind her. The warmth of the reception washed over them both, but Sarah could barely speak. "He needs help," she rasped, voice thick with cold and urgency. Behind the counter, Dr. Rachel Kim looked up in shock. Rachel, mid-30s, hair tied back in a neat bun, moved with an easy confidence that barely masked her weariness. Her eyes narrowed, assessing the scene in an instant. "Bring him in," she said. "Quick, before he collapses." The next minutes blurred, Rachel barking orders, her vet tech scrambling for blankets and medical supplies. Sarah watched, heart pounding, as Rachel examined the horse's sunken sides and crusted wounds. She winced when Rachel gently pressed along the horse's spine. "He's dehydrated, malnourished." This didn't happen overnight. Deputy Joe Morales arrived just as Rachel was tending to the cracked hooves. Joe, young and earnest with a badge that still looked too new on his chest, took in the scene, jaw tightening. He pulled out his phone, quietly snapping photos of the injuries, the chain, the filth caked in the horse's mane. "We'll need these for the report," he murmured. Rachel's jaw clenched as she trimmed away tangles from the horse's mane, revealing old scars and fresher wounds underneath. She moved methodically, but every touch was careful, almost reverent. Sarah could see something raw flicker in Rachel's eyes, something more than professional concern. In the corner of the exam room, a faded trophy sat on a shelf, glinting in the fluorescent light. Barrel racing, the plaque read, 2006. Sarah caught Rachel's glance at it, the way her face tightened as if remembering a different life, a different kind of pain. The horse stood shakily, ears flicking toward every sound, but he didn't try to bolt. Sarah's hand never left his neck, and he pressed into her palm, breathing her in like a lifeline. "His name's Cedar," Sarah whispered suddenly, surprising herself. "He just feels like a cedar." The name seemed to settle on the animal, steadying them both. The moment shattered when the front door slammed open, letting in a gust of snow and two men whose presence seemed to shrink the room. Gary Madsen, local ranch owner, barrel-chested and red-faced, barged forward. Beside him was Councilman Bolton, impeccably dressed, eyes cold and calculating. "That's my horse," Gary barked, stabbing a finger toward Cedar. "He wandered off 2 weeks ago. I want him back now." Rachel straightened, wiping her hands on her scrubs. "He's been abused and neglected. You're not getting him back until we investigate." Gary's face darkened. "You don't want to cross me, Doc." "I'll have the sheriff down here in 10 minutes. Bolton's smile was all teeth. "This town takes care of its own, Dr. Kim. Let's not make a scene over a dumb animal. Sarah, you know how things work here." The words hit Sarah like a slap, but she met his gaze, spine stiffening. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's time things changed. Joe stepped between them, voice calm but steady. "Nobody's taking the horse tonight. I'm filing an official report. If there's been a crime, the law decides, not threats." Gary's nostrils flared, but Bolton rested a hand on his arm. "Let's go, Gary. For now." They swept out, the door banging shut behind them. The tension in the room hung heavy even after they were gone. Rachel's hands trembled as she cleaned Cedar's wounds. "They'll be back," she said quietly. "People like that, they don't give up. Not when they think they're above the law." Sarah squeezed her shoulder gently. "We're not alone. We have each other, and we have Cedar." "That's enough, for now." Rachel looked over at her old trophy again, the past written in her eyes. It had been years since she'd felt that fire, that sense of fighting for something bigger than herself. Cedar, battered but alive, seemed to sense the shift in her heart. He flicked his ears forward, taking a wobbly step closer, and nudged Rachel's arm with his velvet muzzle. Hope flared. For the first time, Rachel let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this time she wouldn't fail. The clinic fell quiet, the night pressing in, but there was strength in the silence. Cedar stood between Sarah and Rachel, not just a rescue, but a symbol, a living, breathing promise that some battles are worth fighting, even when the odds are stacked high and the whole town seems set against you. Outside, the wind howled, but inside the little clinic, a fragile alliance formed. Cedar's survival was far from guaranteed, and the fight for justice had only begun. But Sarah, Rachel, and Joe stood together, united by compassion, determination, and a growing sense of courage that would not be silenced. For Cedar, for themselves, for every silent victim, this was just the beginning. Nightfall brought a heavy, relentless snowstorm that blanketed Willow Creek, swallowing the streets in silence. It was the kind of storm that made the world feel smaller, as if nothing existed outside the clinic's fogged windows and the sharp metallic tang of antiseptic in the air. The storm cut off all roads in and out of town. By dawn, the world outside was a vast white void, impassable. Inside, the fight to keep Cedar alive had turned into a waiting game against the elements and against the memories each person carried like invisible scars. Sarah curled on a folding chair beside Cedar's makeshift stall, exhaustion etched deep in her bones. Her son Tyler had spent the night with a neighbor. Sarah had called to let him know she might not make it home. But she couldn't leave Cedar, not now. The horse was lying on his side, head in her lap, breath ragged, the heat lamp above barely denting the chill. Rachel paced the clinic in the dim, generator-powered light, stopping now and then to check Cedar's pulse, to refill the IV, to brush stray shavings from his matted mane. Her hands shook, not just from fatigue or cold, but from a memory she couldn't push away. Years ago, when she was 16, Rachel had owned a horse, just like Cedar. Her name was Tessa, a chestnut with a star on her forehead and a streak of wildness in her heart. Rachel had trained for years, winning small-town barrel races, dreaming of something bigger. Then came that winter, the night she lost Tessa to colic. Rachel remembered holding the horse's head, begging her to stay, feeling powerless and raw when the world proved indifferent. It had changed her, left her always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Now, as she watched Cedar's labored breathing, the old fear returned. What if she failed again? Joe, wrapped in a flannel jacket, hovered near the front desk, phone pressed to his ear. He was trying to coordinate with the county, the plows, the animal rescue teams, anyone who could get them more supplies. But the storm had cut off everything. The medicine for Cedar's infection was running low, the last dose measured out with trembling hands. Even the clinic's generator stuttered, threatening to plunge them into darkness. Rachel knelt beside Sarah, both of them silent for a long moment, just listening to the wind rattle the clinic's shutters. "I don't know if he's strong enough," Rachel admitted softly. "We've done all we can, but sometimes it's not enough." Sarah reached out, brushing her fingers over Cedar's rough mane. "He's a fighter. He wouldn't have lasted this long if he wasn't. I think he just needs someone to believe in him again." She hesitated, remembering the night she lost her husband, how she'd sat in a hospital room after the accident, numb and furious at the world for being so unfair, how she'd survived only because of Tyler, how she'd learned that sometimes you have to be the one to keep the faith when no one else will. Joe appeared in the doorway, the glare of his phone screen casting shadows across his face. "I got something," he said, voice low but urgent. "I scanned Cedar's microchip. He wasn't registered to Gary at all. He's from a sanctuary in Bozeman. Reported stolen almost 2 years ago." Rachel blinked, stunned. "That's 3 hours from here. How did he end up locked in Gary's barn?" Joe shook his head. "Don't know. But it means Gary lied. We need to get in touch with the sanctuary as soon as the lines are open." The news jolted Sarah awake, hope flickering even as fear gnawed at her. If Cedar had been stolen, how many other horses had disappeared like this? And why would someone as powerful as Gary risk his reputation over a half-starved animal? The questions twisted through her thoughts, leaving her unsettled. The storm raged on. Rachel and Sarah took turns keeping watch, feeding Cedar by hand, cleaning his wounds and whispering soft words to chase away the darkness. Cedar would flinch at every loud noise, but when Sarah sang under her breath, a tune from her childhood, he'd tilt his head, listening, sometimes closing his eyes as if the song conjured up a better place. As the hours crept by, Cedar's fever broke. By dawn, his breathing eased and he managed to rise shakily to his feet. Sarah offered him a small handful of oats, and for the first time, Cedar accepted, lips brushing her palm, warm and grateful. Tears filled Sarah's eyes and Rachel pressed a hand over her own heart, relief and awe blooming inside her. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was something, a step forward after so many setbacks. They watched the snow soften in the first light, still uncertain of what would come next. Outside, the town slept under a shroud of white. Inside, in the hush of the clinic, the bond between woman and horse grew stronger with every passing minute. The storm outside began to fade, but the questions about Cedar's past, Gary's secrets, and their own wounds remained. Would Cedar truly recover? Would justice ever be served? The answers waited, like sunlight behind clouds, just out of reach. But for now, there was warmth in the stall, the slow rhythm of Cedar's breath, and the fragile hope that no matter how broken you felt, healing was possible, one small act of courage at a time. The storm finally loosened its grip on Willow Creek, leaving a fragile hush in its wake. Drifts of snow stacked against the clinic's walls, turning the windows into squares of blue-white light. Inside, the quiet was almost sacred, broken only by the soft rustle of hay and Cedar's steady, tentative breaths. With the worst of the fever gone, Cedar now stood in his stall, head low, but eyes more alert, nostrils gently flaring as he learned to trust the scents and sounds of this new world. Rachel Kim moved carefully, her every gesture measured with the kind of attention she once reserved for high-stakes barrel racing. She wore her stethoscope like armor, but when she knelt beside Cedar, her hand trembled just a little on the brush. She began to hum, almost absent-mindedly, an old folk tune her mother used to sing. The melody drifted between the wooden walls, soft as breath. Sarah sat on a hay bale, arms wrapped around her knees, watching Rachel work. The exhaustion in her bones was giving way to something quieter and deeper. A sense of belonging, maybe, or the slow thaw of hope. Cedar's journey was now her own, woven through sleepless nights and uncertain mornings. "You know," Rachel said, breaking the silence, "I never thought I'd see another horse like this. Not after Tessa." She kept brushing Cedar's mane, her eyes focused on the task. "After Tessa died, I promised myself I'd never let myself get that close again. It hurt too much." Sarah listened, remembering how, only days before, she'd hesitated outside that old barn, wanting to turn away, to save herself from more pain. "Sometimes," she murmured, "the hardest thing is believing we deserve another chance." Rachel stopped humming. She looked at Sarah, and for a moment both women shared the naked vulnerability of people who'd lost more than they cared to admit. "I'm scared," Rachel confessed, her voice thin. "What if I fail him like I failed her?" Sarah shook her head. "You didn't fail, Rachel. You loved her. You love Cedar now. That's all anything can ask." Cedar flicked his ears and pressed his muzzle into Rachel's palm, startling her with the force of his trust. She smiled, a real one this time, and the lines of worry on her face eased. A sharp trill broke the quiet, the landline phone ringing at the front desk. Sarah stood quickly, heart thudding, and hurried to answer. The connection was crackly, but a gentle voice came through. "This is Marion at Bozeman Sanctuary. Is there any news about Cedar?" Sarah's breath caught. "We found him. He's safe, but he's been through hell." There was a long, trembling silence on the other end. "We've been looking for him for so long. He was a therapy horse here, a gentle soul, especially with the children. They used to braid his mane and read him stories in the field. Sarah blinked away tears. He's fighting to get better. We'll keep you updated. After she hung up, Sarah brought a letter from Marion out to the stall, reading it aloud to Rachel and Cedar. Marion wrote about Cedar's playful spirit, how he'd brought shy kids out of their shells and comforted grieving families. He always seemed to sense when someone needed him, the letter said. We never found another horse quite like him. As Sarah read, Cedar stepped forward, slow, deliberate, and pressed his head against Rachel's shoulder, closing his eyes. Rachel, caught off guard, let her hand settle on his neck. For the first time, Cedar truly leaned into her, surrendering to the comfort and safety he'd long been denied. The healing was not just physical. Rachel felt it in the quiet, the way her own heartache seemed to loosen, piece by piece, as Cedar began to trust her. She whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep, but meant with her whole soul. Days blurred into each other, marked by simple rituals, feeding Cedar, cleaning his wounds, sharing stories of lost dreams and new beginnings. Sarah visited every day after her grocery shifts, bringing homemade muffins and laughter, brightening the sterile clinic with warmth. Tyler, Sarah's son, came too, shy at first, but soon won over by Cedar's patience. He would sit cross-legged in the straw, sketching Cedar's long face in a battered notebook. Outside, the snow melted in slow rivulets. Inside, a family was forming, unexpected and imperfect. But the shadows of the past lingered. Each night, Rachel checked the locks twice, feeling eyes watching from the darkness. Gary and Councilman Bolton still stalked the edges of town, their threats echoing in Rachel's mind. The fight for justice was far from over. The phone call from Bozeman had opened a new chapter. If Cedar could be stolen from a sanctuary, what else was happening in the shadows of Willow Creek? Sarah sensed the tension, too. She saw the way Rachel glanced over her shoulder when she left the clinic at night, or the way Joe lingered a little too long in his patrol car nearby. Still, there was hope, a fragile, bright thread binding them together. In Cedar's slow, patient recovery, in Rachel's whispered stories, in Tyler's laughter echoing off the walls, each small act, feeding, cleaning, sitting quietly, was a rebellion against despair. The path to true healing, for Cedar and for themselves, had only just begun. But in the hush of the stall, with sunlight slanting through frosted glass, it was enough. They were learning, all over again, that healing wasn't about erasing the scars, but about building something new in spite of them. Cedar, once locked away and forgotten, now had a family. And Sarah and Rachel, both broken in their own ways, were discovering that together they could begin to mend. The arrival of spring was subtle in Willow Creek, icy puddles shrinking, snow receding from the fields, the air tinged with the smell of damp earth and thawing pine. But the chill in Rachel's bones lingered. With Cedar's strength growing every day, Rachel and Sarah felt both hope and unease, each day marked by new questions and the suspicion that the worst wasn't behind them. One gray morning, Sarah and Rachel met up at the clinic before sunrise. Joe Morales was waiting, his patrol car idling on the curb, coffee steaming in his hands. Joe's face was drawn, eyes shadowed by long nights of paperwork and patrolling the same small roads, looking for threats no one wanted to name. "We need to check Gary's property," Joe said in a low voice. "Something's off." Anna's picked up chatter. She says there's more going on than just Cedar's case. Anna was Joe's friend from college, now an undercover state investigator embedded in the region. Her tip-offs had always been quiet, cautious, and reliable. The trio agreed to keep their visit discreet. The town was small, and everyone talked. One wrong move, and Gary or Bolton would know they were poking around. By mid-morning, Sarah, Rachel, and Joe took the long way to Gary's ranch, parking far down the road. Wind rattled the barbed wire as they picked their way through tall grass and the scattered bones of forgotten winter. Sarah's boots slipped in the mud. Rachel kept glancing over her shoulder, the memory of Gary's threats as fresh as the frost on the ground. Gary's barn stood hulking and silent. Out back, the trio moved carefully, searching for signs of life or neglect. They found hoof prints, fresh, not yet smudged by wind or rain, leading to a series of dilapidated sheds, partially hidden by overgrown juniper and rusted equipment. Rachel crouched beside a stall, running her fingers over the dirt and straw. "This isn't old," she whispered. "There are still fresh shavings. Someone's been keeping horses here, recently." Joe took photos, snapping shots of hoof prints, scattered feed bags, and chains half buried in muck. The tension grew as they moved from one hidden stable to the next, each one holding evidence. Scraps of mane, chewed rails, worn halters. No horses, but the recent activity was impossible to miss. Rachel's anxiety mounted. Her family had always warned her, never cross the powerful, never dig too deep. "If Gary finds us out here," she began. "We'll handle it," Sarah interrupted. "He can't hurt us if we stick together." The words sounded braver than she felt. Just then, Anna appeared, emerging from a grove of cottonwoods at the edge of the property. She wore plain jeans and a battered hat, blending in with the ranch hands. Her eyes, though, were sharp, calculating, a hint of adrenaline in her quick steps. "Walk casual," Anna murmured, handing Joe a manila envelope stuffed with documents. "I've got enough here to keep the DA busy for weeks. Gary's ranch isn't just a dumping ground. There's a ring, moving horses all across state lines." Cedar was just one of dozens. Sarah's heart raced. "What about the sheriff?" she asked. "Bolton's got him in his pocket." Anna's jaw set. "That's the problem. The corruption goes all the way up. We need evidence, and we need to move fast." They debated their next steps, voices low and urgent. Do they go public, trust the sheriff's office, or gather more evidence and wait for the state to swoop in? Rachel's hands trembled as she held the folder, proof of suffering, of lives traded and discarded. She hated the way her own fear clawed at her, telling her to turn back, keep quiet, stay safe. Back at the clinic, Cedar greeted Rachel with a low nicker, now strong enough to walk the length of the paddock. His coat glistened in the morning sun. Sarah watched him nuzzle Tyler, gently taking a carrot from the boy's open palm. "He's coming back to life," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. But that night, as Rachel walked the fence line, she spotted movement near the tree line. A figure, half shrouded by the dusk, lingered just out of reach. Cedar snorted, ears pricked forward, body tense. Rachel's heart hammered. Was it Gary? Someone else watching? She hustled inside, locking the doors tight, double-checking the windows. When Sarah arrived for her evening visit, she found Rachel sitting with a flashlight, eyes fixed on the darkness. "Do you think we're in danger?" Sarah asked, voice shaking. Rachel nodded, refusing to sugarcoat it. "I think we always were, but Cedar's not alone anymore. Neither are we." That night Anna called again, her tone grim. "There's a meeting at Bolton's house tomorrow. I'm going in, wired. If anything happens to me, you need to take the evidence straight to the feds. Don't trust anyone local. And watch your backs." The warning settled over them like another layer of cold. In the moonlit paddock, Cedar paced restlessly, occasionally glancing toward the shadows. When Rachel stepped outside, Cedar trotted to the fence, pressing his face against her shoulder, a wordless gesture of loyalty and protection. Sarah watched from the porch, realizing just how much Cedar had become a part of their lives, their fight, their fragile sense of hope. The world outside their small circle was growing darker. But inside the clinic, inside their hearts, resolve was taking root. Whatever Gary, Bolton, or the shadows tried, they would stand together. For Cedar, for every animal lost and forgotten, and for themselves. If you were in Sarah or Rachel's shoes, would you risk everything for justice, or would you turn away to protect your own peace? Let us know in the comments below and keep listening. The fight isn't over yet. A sharp wind swept down from the mountains as dusk fell over Willow Creek, rattling loose siding and making the world outside the clinic feel even smaller, more exposed. Inside, a sense of unease gnawed at everyone. Rachel closed the clinic early, checking locks twice, glancing over her shoulder at every sound. Sarah noticed how her hands shook as she filled Cedar's water bucket, and how Cedar himself paced the stall, nostrils flaring, uneasy in ways animals sense long before humans do. That night, Anna arrived through the back entrance, moving like a shadow. She kept her head low, her tone hushed. "We're running out of time," she told Rachel, Sarah, and Joe, her eyes darting toward the windows. "This isn't just Gary's operation, it's bigger. We've tracked sales and transfers to 3 neighboring states. The horses, some are sent to illegal races, others vanish altogether." Joe's knuckles whitened around his phone. "How long have you known?" Anna shook her head. "Long enough. But it's hard to get anything to stick. Too many people looking the other way. Bolton's got friends everywhere, not just the sheriff. I've got photos from last night. Trail cams. Look." She slid a memory card across the table. They watched the grainy images on Joe's laptop, Gary and Bolton, hunched and wary, moving horses by moonlight. Several other faces appeared, some known, some not. In one frame, Gary raised his hand, hitting a horse with a whip, its eyes wild with fear. The sickening reality settled on everyone in the room. This was no small-town dispute. This was organized crime, and they were standing in its crosshairs. Rachel tried to steady her breathing, but the memories of Tessa, of every animal she'd failed to save, pressed in tight. "Why us?" she whispered. "Why now?" Sarah reached out, squeezing her hand. "Because Cedar survived. Because he found us." As if on cue, there was a crash, glass shattering in the exam room. Joe and Anna rushed in, guns drawn, but whoever had thrown the rocks was already gone. On the tile, a spray of glass sparkled in the moonlight, and a single piece of paper fluttered down, in thick black marker, "Back off, or you're next." Anna cursed under her breath. "They know we're getting close. We have to move now." Rachel picked up the note with gloved hands, rage and fear warping her face. "They're not just threatening us. They're threatening Cedar, every animal in that barn." The next hours passed in a blur. Anna and Joe plotted with quiet urgency, using burner phones, double-checking doors and cameras. Rachel and Sarah tried to act normal, but every creak, every gust of wind set their nerves on edge. They tried not to show fear in front of Tyler, who watched Cedar with wide, anxious eyes, picking up more from the adult's silence than from their words. But Cedar wouldn't let them stay scared. That night, as the clinic quieted, he pushed his head into Rachel's arms, huffing warm breath onto her shoulder. Sarah stroked his mane, whispering, "We're with you, Cedar. We're not going anywhere." The next day, Anna brought news. State police were on standby, but she needed hard evidence before they could move. "We set the plan for tonight. Joe, you distract the sheriff. Keep him occupied. Rachel and I are going to Gary's. Sarah, you stay with Cedar. If anything goes wrong, you get Tyler and go straight to the sanctuary in Bozeman. Promise me." Sarah's eyes burned, but she nodded. "I promise, but come back, both of you." Dusk came fast. Joe called the sheriff with a fabricated story about a break-in on the far edge of town. As the sun slipped behind the pines, Anna and Rachel dressed in dark layers and headed out. Their hearts pounded as they parked down the road from Gary's ranch, ducking through shadows and climbing fences slick with mud and ice. Meanwhile, at the clinic, Sarah kept the lights low. Cedar sensed her nerves, standing by the door, ears pricked toward every sound. Tyler drew pictures in the corner, trying to keep calm, but Sarah could see the tension in his clenched jaw. At Gary's, Anna led Rachel to a back barn, careful to avoid the security lights. Through a crack in the boards, Rachel saw horses, thin, battered, eyes wide with fear. She bit her lip, rage boiling. Anna snapped photos, whispering every detail into her recorder. Suddenly, footsteps crunched outside. Their window was closing. Back at the clinic, Sarah's heart skipped when Cedar pawed at the stall, nostrils flaring. She glanced outside and caught the glint of headlights at the far end of the drive. Then a figure moving between the trees. Her blood ran cold. She reached for her phone, hands shaking, ready to call Anna but not wanting to draw attention. Instead, she whispered to Tyler, "Go to the back room and stay quiet, no matter what. Lock the door, okay?" Tyler nodded, understanding more than his years should allow. He vanished into the back, silent as a ghost. Outside, the figure approached, pausing just at the edge of the paddock. Cedar stomped and snorted, planting himself between the door and the intruder, his body a barrier of muscle and purpose. The figure lingered, then retreated, fading into the woods. Cedar remained on guard, refusing to move until Sarah whispered it was safe. Midnight neared. Anna and Rachel made their move, sneaking into the barn and snapping photos of documents, ledgers, and terrified horses. Suddenly, voices boomed outside, Gary and Bolton arguing with a third man. Anna grabbed Rachel's arm, leading her through a side door, hearts racing. They made it back to the car, breathless but alive. Back at the clinic, Sarah finally exhaled as Anna's text came through. "We got it. Be ready." Rachel returned just before dawn, eyes rimmed red but shining with a fierce determination. She hugged Sarah tight, Cedar nuzzling them both. "We're almost there," Rachel whispered. "They're not getting away with this. Not in our town." For the first time, Sarah believed it. Even in the dark, Cedar stood tall, a living promise that courage once sparked could never be silenced. The final fight was coming, and this time they would not run. Midnight in Willow Creek carried a thick, electric silence. It was the kind of hush that warned of trouble and change, the air heavy with tension and frozen dew. Rachel's hands trembled as she checked her watch. 2 minutes until Anna gave the signal. Her heart thudded in her ears, a relentless drumbeat that echoed the fear and hope swirling inside her. The plan was simple, but the risks were enormous. Joe had the sheriff occupied on the far side of town, spinning a wild tale about a prowler breaking into the hardware store. Anna was wired up, her state investigator credentials tucked inside her coat, and Rachel tried not to think about what would happen if things went wrong. Sarah, back at the clinic, kept her phone close and her mind racing, ready to run if she had to. Cedar, aware of the unease, watched every shadow, every shifting light, the animal's instincts sharp as ever. Anna and Rachel moved through the darkness, breath shallow, boots crunching on the icy grass behind Gary's ranch. They ducked behind a sagging fence and made for the main barn, where the stench of neglect mingled with fear and old hay. Anna squeezed Rachel's arm, whispering, "Stay close. Cameras above the door. Walk casual." Inside, the barn was darker than expected. A weak bulb flickered, illuminating 4 horses penned in filthy stalls, thin, eyes wide, some limping or trembling. One nickered as they entered, the sound plaintive and desperate. Rachel's throat closed at the sight. She forced herself to move, clipboard in hand, scribbling notes, snapping photos. Anna's voice was barely a murmur as she recorded everything, from the license plates of hidden trailers to the ledgers stashed in a dusty file cabinet. Suddenly, a door slammed somewhere down the hall. Heavy boots clattered on concrete. Gary's voice, booming with anger, broke the silence. "Who the hell's in my barn?" Anna pushed Rachel behind a stack of feed bags. Gary appeared in the dim light, shotgun in hand, his face a mask of fury. "Thought you'd snoop around, didn't you?" he spat, stepping closer, the barrel trained on Anna. Rachel's pulse raced. She saw her life flashing through her mind, her childhood in the rodeo, the gentle horses, the mistakes and the losses. The fear that she'd failed Tessa all those years ago surged up, threatening to choke her. But then she saw Cedar in her memory, standing tall in the clinic, trusting her. Something hardened inside her, and she stepped forward, voice shaking but strong. "You're not going to hurt anyone, Gary. Not anymore." He sneered, jabbing the barrel closer. "You think you can take what's mine?" Rachel shook her head, trying to keep his attention on her. Anna's hand slipped toward her badge, voice firm. "State investigator. Drop the weapon, Gary, and put your hands up. You're done." For a moment, Gary's face twisted in shock, rage warring with fear. Bolton appeared in the doorway, face pale, stammering, "You can't do this. We run this town." Anna spoke into her radio. "Go, now!" Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Blue lights flashed through the cracks in the barn boards. Gary hesitated, but in that hesitation, Rachel lunged for the lock on the horse's stalls, smashing it with the butt of a shovel. The horses surged out, Cedar at the front. He had slipped his halter at the clinic and followed the scent, Rachel realized, his loyalty and courage never in doubt. Sarah, watching from the edge of the property, shouted, "Cedar, over here!" The big gelding thundered through the snow, mane flying, his herd behind him. Rachel ran after them, heart pounding, just as the police swept onto the property. The next minutes blurred into chaos. Gary tried to bolt, but Anna and 2 state troopers cut him off. Bolton collapsed to his knees, hands in the air. Deputies corralled the horses, Anna's camera catching every moment. Rachel wept openly, unable to hide her relief as Cedar pressed his head into her chest, his breath warm against her jacket. Joe rushed up, face wild with adrenaline. "You made it," he gasped, gripping Rachel's shoulder. Anna gave him a nod, holding up the recovered evidence. "It's all here." Enough to put them away. Sarah hugged Cedar, tears freezing on her cheeks, Tyler running to her side. "You did it, Mom. You saved them." Rachel knelt beside Cedar, her hands tracing the healing scars on his neck. "We all did," she whispered, voice breaking. "We didn't run this time." The state police rounded up Gary, Bolton, and the others, reading them their rights as cameras flashed. The news crews arrived at dawn, microphones thrust into Rachel's face. "Why risk everything for these animals?" one reporter asked. Rachel glanced at Cedar, then at her friends, Sarah, Anna, Joe, and even little Tyler, who stood with his arms wrapped around Cedar's neck. "Because they never gave up on us," she said softly. "And I wasn't going to give up on them." As sunlight broke over Willow Creek, it illuminated a new world. Horses stumbling to freedom through the snow, children watching with wide eyes, and a battered but unbeaten community gathering in the yard. Cedar, limping but proud, led the way, his head high, his eyes finally bright with hope. For Rachel, Sarah, and everyone who had dared to stand up against cruelty, the night had ended, and in the new day, their courage and Cedar's had changed Willow Creek forever. Dawn brought a restless energy to Willow Creek, the kind that rides on the heels of chaos and exposes everything in stark, blinding light. By the time the sun cleared the pines, the whole town buzzed with the news. State police had arrested Gary Madsen, Councilman Bolton, and 3 other ranch hands. The sleepy community, so used to secrets whispered behind closed doors, now faced a reckoning right in the middle of Main Street. Rachel stood by Cedar's paddock outside the clinic, watching police cruisers and news vans swarm like crows. The horses rescued from Gary's ranch shifted nervously in the temporary pens. Some pressed against the fence, eyes wide and uncertain, while others grazed quietly, savoring freedom for the first time in years. The air was thick with both relief and shame. Inside the clinic, Anna paced, cell phone pressed to her ear, voice clipped. "We have documented evidence of interstate trafficking. Yes, multiple victims. We'll need immediate placement for all rescued animals." Her words made it real, undeniable. This was bigger than Willow Creek, bigger than any one town's silence. Sarah watched from the break room window, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Tyler clung to her side, silent, drawing Cedar and the other horses over and over again in his notebook. She knew the whole town was watching, waiting to see what would happen next, some hoping for justice, others for the storm to simply pass. Rachel found herself drifting through the morning in a fog of exhaustion and relief. She checked on Cedar, his wounds healing, coat glossy from months of care, and pressed her cheek against his neck. The gentle horse nickered, nuzzling her with the trust of someone who's finally learned the world can be kind. But as the morning wore on, the true cost of the cover-up came to light. Officers led Gary and Bolton past a silent crowd. Gary stared at the ground, red-faced, while Bolton tried to hold his head high. Old secrets surfaced fast: missing horses from neighboring counties, falsified bills of sale, local officials who looked away when they should have intervened. Joe, still in uniform, worked with Anna and the state troopers to process evidence. He spoke to townsfolk who trickled in, some angry, some ashamed, some openly weeping as they realized what had been happening just out of sight. A group of teenagers held a homemade sign, "Justice for Cedar." It was a start. Inside, Rachel slumped on the floor of the feed room, head in her hands. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by an aching emptiness. For years she'd told herself that she couldn't make a difference, that standing up just got you hurt. But now, holding Cedar's halter in her lap, she felt the tremors of something deeper than fear: relief, grief, and the beginnings of hope. Cedar wandered over and gently nudged her, his dark eyes soft with understanding. Rachel wept into his mane, letting the tears fall for Tessa, for every horse lost, and for the girl she used to be, the one who dreamed of changing the world. "We did it, Cedar," she whispered. "You made me brave again." Outside, news cameras rolled as Anna gave a statement. This ring operated for years, protected by silence and fear. But one horse's survival, one act of courage, brought the truth to light. There are more out there still waiting to be saved. The gravity of those words rippled through Willow Creek. At noon, the mayor called a town meeting in front of the old post office. People came in droves, bundled against the wind, some still in pajamas. Rachel stood beside Sarah, Anna, and Joe as the mayor announced the formation of a town task force for animal welfare and a full investigation into local government corruption. Neighbors who'd never spoken to each other now joined hands, sharing stories of horses that vanished, of strange deals made late at night. Some apologized to Rachel and Sarah for doubting them, for whispering behind their backs. Others pledged money and supplies for the rescued animals. A quiet, determined hope took root in the community. Cedar's story became a catalyst, no longer just about one horse's suffering, but about everyone's willingness to look away or speak up. Even those who had stayed silent felt a weight lift, a sense that they too could be forgiven if they chose to do better. That evening, Anna coordinated the transport of the rescued horses to sanctuaries across Montana, Bozeman among them. Cedar, however, stayed at the clinic, his journey with Sarah and Rachel unfinished. Before the last trailer left, the children of Willow Creek tied colorful ribbons in the manes of the rescued horses, wishing them luck and whispering goodbyes. Tears flowed freely. Hugs passed between strangers. Rachel, utterly spent, collapsed onto the clinic's porch as the sun set. Cedar stood beside her, strong and calm, the scars on his neck slowly fading but never fully gone. Sarah joined her, passing over a mug of tea. "You kept your promise," Sarah said quietly, "not just to Cedar, but to yourself." Rachel nodded, her voice raw. "I couldn't have done it alone. None of us could." Anna sat down, the lines of stress and fatigue etched deep on her face. "It's not over. We'll have trials, and there are more horses to save. But this is a start." As darkness settled over Willow Creek, the town gathered at the park, lighting lanterns for every animal lost and everyone rescued. Children danced around Cedar, laughter ringing in the cool night air. For the first time in years, Rachel let herself hope that Willow Creek might become a place where compassion outshone fear, and silence no longer protected the guilty. Cedar, once abandoned and broken, had become a living symbol of survival and courage. And in the gentle hush that fell over the park, Rachel knew this was not the end, but a new beginning. Chains broken, truth revealed, and a community finally awake. The weeks after the arrests unfurled slowly, as if the entire town of Willow Creek had been holding its breath for years and now needed time to exhale. Winter lost its bite, replaced by the first hints of green in the fields and the muddy joy of spring thaw. Yet beneath the new sunlight, the old wounds remained, on the bodies of the rescued horses, in the memories of those who'd loved and lost, and in the collective conscience of a town coming to terms with its silence. Rachel found herself drawn more than ever to the quiet spaces, sunlit fields, Cedar's paddock, the narrow lane behind the clinic where wildflowers had begun to push through the frost. She often sat beside Cedar in the grass, her back against the warm wall of his body, breathing in the scents of hay, earth, and the subtle sweetness of spring. The legal storm had mostly passed. Gary, Bolton, and their accomplices faced indictments and soon trial. But the emotional storm lingered. Cedar healed slowly but steadily. The scars on his neck softened, his coat gleamed, and his eyes brightened with the patient wisdom of an animal who'd known both suffering and rescue. Rachel brushed him every morning, her hands steady, her mind finally quiet enough to reflect. Sometimes Tyler would join her, asking endless questions about horses, rescue, and what it meant to forgive. Rachel answered honestly, even when the answers hurt. "Does it get easier?" Tyler asked one morning, pressing his cheek to Cedar's side. Rachel paused, hands still in the horse's mane. "No," she said softly, "but you get stronger. Every time you choose to care, it gets a little easier to keep going, even if it never stops hurting." The town, too, began its own reckoning. The mayor called regular meetings in the school gym, inviting everyone to speak. At first, the air was thick with guilt and defensiveness, neighbors confessing to looking away, to believing lies, to letting fear guide their choices. Some who'd supported Gary and Bolton wept openly, voices cracking as they apologized to Rachel, Sarah, and Anna. Others admitted they still didn't trust the system, but wanted to help anyway. Sarah surprised herself by stepping up as a leader. With her gentle strength, she started a support group at the community center, not just for animal lovers, but for anyone dealing with trauma or loss. Her own story, the accident, the years of struggle, the night she found Cedar, became a beacon for others. Slowly, people who'd carried private pain began to share it, finding comfort in a community that had learned, at great cost, that silence could be its own kind of violence. Rachel's role shifted as well. No longer just the town vet, she was asked to consult on animal welfare policies, to help design better protections for all of Willow Creek's creatures. She accepted, hesitant at first, but then with growing confidence. Her experience, the pain, the healing, the courage to face down those in power, became her greatest asset. One afternoon, Rachel visited the new sanctuary site on the edge of town. Volunteers cleared brush, raised fencing, and built run-in sheds. The land was muddy, the work hard, but the mood was bright. Neighbors who'd once barely spoken now worked side by side, laughing and arguing, forging the bonds that would make Willow Creek stronger. Anna and Joe handled logistics, their friendship forged in fire, while Sarah organized volunteers and Tyler, with a serious face, supervised the horses' first steps onto the new grass. Cedar was among the first to explore the new pasture. He walked slowly, testing the ground, then broke into a gentle canter, head high and tail streaming behind him. Rachel watched, tears burning her eyes, as Cedar circled back and pressed his muzzle to her shoulder. A thank you, and a reminder of all they'd survived. Yet even as the community rebuilt, Rachel knew the wounds would never fully disappear. Healing was not erasure. It was acceptance, a daily practice of courage and kindness. She saw it in Cedar's careful trust, in Sarah's open heart, in the way the town's children now asked questions instead of looking away. One evening after a long day at the sanctuary, Rachel sat beneath a budding cottonwood with Sarah. The setting sun painted the sky in gold and rose. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked quietly, her eyes on the horses grazing in the dusk. Rachel shook her head. "No, the pain is part of the story. I used to think I'd never be whole again, not after Tessa, not after everything. But Cedar, he made me see that you don't have to be whole to be brave, or to help someone else heal." Sarah smiled, a quiet pride in her expression. "You helped us all, Rachel. You helped me." The sound of laughter drifted from the barn, Tyler and his friends racing each other through the hay, Cedar watching over them like an old soul. Rachel let the moment wash over her, a sense of peace settling deeper than it had in years. In town, the weekly meetings continued. The conversation shifted, from guilt to plans, from what was lost to what could still be built. Neighbors started a fund for animal rescue. The high school added animal welfare to its curriculum. More people volunteered, more voices joined the chorus demanding accountability and compassion. Willow Creek had changed, was still changing. It would take years to heal, years to earn back trust and build something new. But every day brought a new step forward. Cedar's scars would fade but never vanish, a living testament to the truth that some pain remains, and that's okay. Healing, Rachel realized, is less about fixing what's broken and more about carrying it together, so the burden is lighter for everyone. In Willow Creek, that lesson was taking root, slowly, stubbornly, beautifully. And with each sunrise, hope came easier. The first Saturday in June dawned clear and gold, with light spilling across Willow Creek in a way that made the whole town seem new. Flags waved from the porch railings, and handmade banners stretched between trees in the town park, announcing Willow Creek's inaugural Rescue Day, a celebration of survival, justice, and second chances. For weeks, Sarah and Rachel had worked alongside volunteers, planning every detail: food trucks on the edge of the field, a petting zoo for children, booths run by local animal rescues, and a speaker's podium beneath a red and white tent. The sun was already warm as Rachel arrived with Cedar, his coat glossy and mane neatly brushed, a wreath of wildflowers draped around his neck. Tyler led him proudly, smiling at the small crowd of children gathered to pet Cedar and listen to his story. For Cedar, the attention was no longer frightening. He stood calm and regal, accepting gentle pats and whispered thank yous, as if he understood every word. Sarah watched from the edge of the crowd, hand pressed to her heart, gratitude welling up for all that had changed since that bitter winter night. Cedar's journey from a locked stall to this sun-dappled field was more than a miracle. It was proof that the town could heal, and that courage could catch on like wildfire. As people settled on blankets and benches, Rachel stepped onto the stage, Cedar standing steady beside her. She paused, taking in the faces, friends and strangers, neighbors who'd once looked away, children who'd learned to ask questions instead of turning from pain. Anna and Joe sat near the front, Sarah beside them, her arm around Tyler. Even the mayor, who'd once hesitated to rock the boat, stood in the crowd, ready to listen. Rachel took a shaky breath and began. "I used to think the worst thing in life was losing something you love," she said, her voice carrying over the hush. "But Cedar taught me that the real tragedy is giving up on the chance to make things right." He reminded all of us, sometimes loudly, sometimes quietly, that healing doesn't start until we refuse to look away, when we stop making excuses, when we choose to act, even if we're scared. She told Cedar's story, The night he was found, the fear, the battle to survive, the community that came together to face the darkness and step into the light. She spoke honestly of her own scars, losing Tessa, the years she spent doubting her place in Willow Creek, the guilt she carried for not speaking out sooner. And then she smiled at Sarah and Tyler, at Anna and Joe, at the children clustered at Cedar's side. "We all have a choice," Rachel continued. "Justice isn't something that happens to us. It's something we create together every day in big ways and small. The cost of silence is always too high. But when we're brave enough to be vulnerable, to share our stories, to admit our pain, to offer help, we make room for real change. And when we support each other, when we give second chances, we create a legacy that outlives every mistake, every scar." She finished, and the applause was thunderous, not just polite but fierce, full of relief and pride. Rachel stepped down, blinking back tears as Cedar nuzzled her, and a line of children took turns hugging his neck. That afternoon, the town celebrated in every way it knew how. Kids ran races in the field. Sarah's homemade lemonade sold out by noon. Anna answered questions at the animal rescue booth, handing out pamphlets and telling children how they could help animals in need. Joe and other deputies helped register local pets for microchips, a simple step to make sure no more animals go missing in Willow Creek. In the late afternoon, the sanctuary from Bozeman sent a representative with a plaque engraved for Cedar, for courage, survival, and the power of hope. Sarah and Rachel accepted it together, promising to share Cedar's story every year on Rescue Day so no one would forget what silence costs and what compassion can build. Under the shade trees, Sarah and Rachel sat side by side, watching children braid Cedar's mane with ribbons and wildflowers. Sarah squeezed Rachel's hand. "We did it," she whispered. "He's really home." Rachel smiled, the sun warm on her face. "Home isn't just a place. It's everyone who helped him get here." Tyler ran up, breathless, waving a drawing of Cedar surrounded by the faces of Willow Creek's people, smiling, united. "He's the hero, right?" Tyler asked. Rachel nodded. "He's one of them. So are you?" "So is everyone who refused to give up." As dusk approached, the town gathered one last time for a candlelit vigil. Rachel spoke a final time, her voice steadier now, carrying her message like a promise. "Change is possible when we refuse to look away. True justice requires all of us. No one can do it alone. And sometimes, the strongest thing we can do is be honest about what hurts and let each other help carry it." A hush fell as the crowd lit their candles, the flames flickering in the twilight. Cedar stood at the center, haloed by gentle light, as children and grown-ups alike came forward to pet him, to thank him, to share in a moment of hope. That night, Willow Creek felt different, a place marked not by the scars of its past, but by the light of its compassion. Cedar's story became the town's story, a living proof that legacies are built not from perfection, but from the courage to begin again, to heal, and to love. As the last candle flickered out and the park emptied, Rachel stood beside Cedar under the vast Montana sky. The pain was still there, but so was something else, something enduring and fierce. For the first time, Willow Creek felt like a place where every life, human or animal, mattered. And as laughter and hope echoed in the night, the promise of a new legacy, of kindness, courage, and second chances, took root, shining brighter than any scar, lighting the way for all who would come after.